Once upon a time, in a village at the edge of a great forest, there lived a little girl who was beloved by everyone who knew her. But no one loved her quite as much as her grandmother, who lived in a cottage deep in the woods, a good half-hour's walk from the village. The grandmother had sewn for her granddaughter a beautiful cloak made of red velvet, with a hood that covered the girl's hair and framed her sweet face. The child loved this cloak so much that she wore it everywhere, and soon everyone in the village began calling her Little Red Riding Hood, for they rarely saw her without it. She was a good child, obedient, kind, helpful to her mother, but she was also young, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, and like all young children, she was innocent. She did not yet understand that the world held dangers. She had been told about them. Of course, her mother had warned her many times about straying from the path, about talking to strangers. But warnings are just words until experience makes them real. And Little Red Riding Hood had not yet had that experience. One morning in early spring, when the flowers were just beginning to bloom and the birds sang in the trees, the girl's mother called her into their small cottage kitchen. "Little Red Riding Hood," her mother said, using the name everyone had come to call her. "I need you to do something very important for me today." "Yes, Mama?" the girl asked, eager to help. "Your grandmother has fallen ill," her mother explained, her face showing concern. "Nothing too serious, I think, but she's weak and cannot leave her bed. I've prepared a basket of food for her, some cake I baked yesterday, a bottle of good wine, fresh butter, and bread. I need you to take it to her." The little girl's face lit up. She loved visiting grandmother, loved walking through the forest, loved feeling grown up, and trusted with important tasks. "But you must listen to me very carefully," her mother said, kneeling down so she was eye level with her daughter. Her hands gripped the girl's shoulders gently but firmly. "You must stay on the path. Do not wander off into the woods, no matter how pretty the flowers look or how interesting something seems. The forest is not safe for a little girl alone." "Yes, Mama," Little Red Riding Hood said dutifully. "And do not stop to talk to anyone you meet. Go straight to grandmother's house, nowhere else. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mama, I understand." "Promise me." "I promise, Mama." The mother looked at her daughter for a long moment, wanting to believe that the child understood, that she would obey. But she also knew her daughter's nature: curious, friendly, trusting. Still, what choice did she have? Her own mother was ill and needed help, and there was no one else to send. "Good girl," she said finally, and kissed her daughter's forehead, Go straight there and come straight home. Don't dawdle." Little Red Riding Hood put on her red cloak and hood, took up the basket, which was covered with a clean white cloth to keep the food fresh, and set out from the village into the forest. The morning was beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the new spring leaves, casting dappled patterns on the forest path. Birds sang their morning songs. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically on a tree. The air smelled of earth and growing things. The little girl walked along happily, swinging her basket, humming a tune her grandmother had taught her. She was thinking about how pleased grandmother would be to see her, how she would smile when she saw the cake and wine. She was thinking about this so intently that she didn't notice, at first, that she was being watched. In the deep forest, where the trees grew thick and the sunlight barely reached the ground, there lived a wolf. He was large and gray, with yellow eyes that gleamed with intelligence and teeth that were sharp as knives. He was also very, very hungry. It had been a hard winter, and food was scarce. The deer had learned to be cautious, the rabbits were swift, and the wolf had gone days without a proper meal. His stomach ached with emptiness, and he prowled the forest, looking for any creature he might catch. And then he smelled something interesting, something human. Following his nose, moving silently through the undergrowth, he came upon a sight that made him stop and consider. There, on the main path through the forest, walked a little girl. She wore a red hood and cloak that stood out like a poppy in a field of grass. She carried a basket and was completely, utterly alone. The wolf's mouth watered. A child would be easy prey, tender meat, a meal that would satisfy his hunger for days. But even as he tensed to spring, something made him pause. Through the trees, not far away, he could hear sounds, the rhythmic thunk, thunk of axes, woodcutters, working in the forest not far from the path. If he attacked the child here, now, she would scream. The woodcutters would hear. They would come running with their axes, and the wolf, for all his strength, knew better than to face armed men. No, he needed to be clever about this. So the wolf did something unusual. He stepped out onto the path, not threateningly, not with teeth bared, but casually, almost friendly. And when he spoke, for in the old stories, wolves could speak when they chose to, his voice was smooth as honey. "Good morning, little girl." Little Red Riding Hood stopped and looked at him. She was startled, certainly, She had never seen a wolf up close before. But she had been raised in a village where dogs were common. And this wolf looked not so different from a large dog, if you didn't look too closely at his teeth. And besides, her mother had warned her about strangers. But a wolf wasn't a stranger, was it? A stranger was a person. This was just an animal. Her mother had said nothing about not talking to animals. "Good morning," she replied politely, because she had been taught to be polite. The wolf smiled, showing just a hint of his teeth. "And where are you going, all alone in the forest?" "I'm going to my grandmother's house," Little Red Riding Hood said. "She's ill, and I'm bringing her food and wine to make her feel better." "How sweet you are," the wolf said, his voice full of false warmth. "And where does your grandmother live?" "In a cottage in the woods, about 20 minutes further along this path. It's the house with the 3 oak trees in front of it." The wolf knew this cottage, isolated, set back from the path, no neighbors nearby. 20 minutes, you say? That's quite a walk for a little girl. Aren't you tired? Oh no, I like walking in the forest. Do you? The wolf moved a little closer, keeping his voice casual, friendly. "Have you noticed how beautiful the forest is this morning? Look at all the flowers blooming just off the path. And listen, can you hear the birds singing? They're putting on quite a concert." Little Red Riding Hood did listen. She did look. And she saw what she had been too focused to notice before: wild flowers blooming in scattered patches beneath the trees. Violets and primroses, wood anemones, and early bluebells. "They are pretty," she admitted. "Your grandmother would love them, I'm sure," the wolf said casually. "If you were to pick her a bouquet of flowers to go with the food, why, I'm sure it would cheer her up tremendously. Nothing says, 'Get well soon,' like fresh flowers." Little Red Riding Hood hesitated. Her mother had said to stay on the path, but flowers were right there, just a few steps away. And grandmother did love flowers. Surely it wouldn't hurt to step off the path for just a moment to gather some. "I suppose I could pick just a few," she said slowly. "Of course you could," the wolf encouraged. "Look, there's a whole patch of violets just over there, and I think I see some primroses further in. Your grandmother would be so pleased." And then, before the little girl could think better of it, the wolf said, "Well, I must be on my way. I hope your grandmother feels better soon. Goodbye, little girl." And he trotted off down the path, disappearing around a bend. Little Red Riding Hood watched him go, then looked at the flowers. Surely picking some wouldn't hurt. It would only take a few minutes, and grandmother would be so happy. She set down her basket at the side of the path and stepped into the forest to gather flowers. But once she had picked all the violets in the first patch, she saw more beautiful flowers a little further on, and beyond those, even prettier ones. And so she wandered deeper and deeper into the forest, her red hood bobbing among the trees, picking flowers and losing track of time completely. She had forgotten her promise to her mother. She had forgotten to be cautious. She had forgotten everything except the simple pleasure of gathering flowers. And she didn't notice that the wolf had not actually gone away. He had simply circled back, staying hidden in the undergrowth, watching her wander off the path. And once he was sure she was thoroughly distracted, he turned and began to run, not after the girl, but ahead of her. He was going to grandmother's house, and he was going to get there first. The wolf ran through the forest like a gray shadow, taking paths that no human knew, moving with the speed and sureness of a creature in his element. He reached the cottage with the 3 oak trees in perhaps 10 minutes, less than half the time it would take a little girl picking flowers. He paused at the edge of the clearing, observing the cottage. It was small, built of wood and stone, with a thatched roof and a small garden. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. The wolf approached the door and knocked gently with his paw. From inside, a weak, elderly voice called out, "Who is it?" The wolf made his voice as high and sweet as he could. "It's me, grandmother, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you cake and wine." There was a pause. Then the grandmother's voice said, "Lift the latch, dear, and come in. I'm too weak to get out of bed." The wolf smiled, a real smile this time, all teeth and hunger, and lifted the latch with his paw. The door swung open. Inside, the cottage was dim, the curtains drawn against the morning light. There was a single room with a bed in the corner, a table and chairs, a fireplace where a small fire burned. And in the bed lay an old woman, gray-haired and frail, pulling her blankets up to her chin as she saw not her granddaughter, but a wolf entering her home. She opened her mouth to scream, but the wolf was upon her in an instant. What happened next? Well, in some versions of this story, the wolf devours the grandmother entirely. In other versions, he locks her in the closet or hides her somewhere safe. The Brothers Grimm, in their version, are not entirely clear on this point, leaving it to the imagination. But what is clear is this: when the wolf was finished, the grandmother was gone, and the wolf had taken her place. He found her nightcap and nightgown, a long white cotton gown that he squeezed himself into, though it strained at the seams around his bulk. He put on her nightcap, tying it under his chin. He climbed into her bed and pulled the covers up high so that only his face showed, and even that he kept in shadow. Then he waited. He didn't have to wait long. Perhaps 15 minutes later, he heard footsteps outside, a knock at the door, and a sweet young voice calling out, "Grandmother, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you cake and wine." The wolf made his voice as much like the grandmother's as he could, weak, elderly, scratchy. "Lift the latch, dear, and come in. I'm too weak to get out of bed." The wolf smiled, a real smile this time, all teeth and hunger, and lifted the latch with his paw. The door opened. Little Red Riding Hood entered, her basket on her arm, her other hand holding a large bouquet of wild flowers. "I'm sorry I took so long, Grandmother," she said cheerfully. "I stopped to pick you flowers. Look how pretty they are. I'll just put them in water and—" She stopped. Even in the dim light of the cottage, something seemed wrong. "Grandmother, are you all right?" "Yes, dear," the wolf croaked, "just very tired. Come here, come closer so I can see you." Little Red Riding Hood approached the bed slowly. The closer she got, the more wrong things seemed. "Grandmother," she said, her voice uncertain now, "what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my dear," the wolf replied. Little Red Riding Hood took another step closer. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have." "The better to see you with, my dear." Another step. The little girl was starting to feel truly frightened now, though she didn't quite understand why. "Grandmother, what big hands you have." "The better to hug you with, my dear." And then Little Red Riding Hood was right beside the bed, and she could see clearly now. See the long snout under the nightcap. See the sharp teeth behind the trembling lips. And she whispered, "Grandmother, what big teeth you have." And the wolf threw off the covers and sprang from the bed, his jaws opening wide, and he snarled, "The better to eat you with." Little Red Riding Hood screamed and ran, but the cottage was small, and the wolf was fast, and there was nowhere to go. He caught her before she reached the door, and now, at this point in the story, you might think all is lost. The wolf has caught Little Red Riding Hood. The grandmother is gone. Evil has won, and this is where the story ends in tragedy. But remember, we're still in the forest, and in the forest, there are other players in this drama. Not far from the grandmother's cottage, a hunter was walking through the woods. He was an experienced woodsman, this hunter. a man who knew the forest and its dangers, who had tracked wolves before and knew their ways. He had heard the little girl's scream, cut short. And now, as he approached the cottage, he heard something else. Sounds of struggle, then silence. Then, after a moment, the sound of loud snoring. Snoring that seemed too loud, too deep, to come from an old, sick woman. The hunter approached the cottage quietly, his hand on the rifle slung across his back. He peered through the window and saw a sight that made his blood run cold. There, in the grandmother's bed, lay a wolf, a large gray wolf, his belly swollen and distended, sleeping off his meal. The grandmother's nightcap had fallen off, and there was no mistaking what he was. The hunter's first instinct was to shoot the wolf then and there, but something made him pause. The wolf's belly was so swollen, so oddly shaped, almost as though, could they still be alive inside? It was a desperate hope, but the hunter was a man of action. He burst through the door, grabbed the sleeping wolf, and with his hunting knife, he carefully cut open the beast's belly. And out tumbled Little Red Riding Hood, alive but shaken, gasping for air. And behind her, the grandmother, weak but breathing. "Oh, thank you, Little Red Riding Hood cried, throwing her arms around the hunter. "I was so frightened." The grandmother sat up slowly, confused and disoriented. "What happened? Where is that terrible wolf?" The hunter pointed to the wolf, who was beginning to stir, weakened by the wound, but not yet dead. "Quickly," the hunter said. "We must act fast." And this is where different versions of the story diverge. In some tellings, the hunter simply finishes the wolf off with his rifle. In the Brothers Grimm version, something more poetic happens. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, with the hunter's help, filled the wolf's belly with heavy stones. Then the hunter sewed it back up. When the wolf finally woke and tried to run away, the stones were so heavy he could barely move. He staggered a few steps and fell down dead. The hunter took the wolf's pelt. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine that Little Red Riding Hood had brought, and soon began to feel better. And Little Red Riding Hood had learned a lesson about trust, about disobedience, about the dangers that lurk in the world. "I will never again leave the path when my mother tells me to stay on it," she said solemnly. "And I will never talk to strangers in the forest, no matter how friendly they seem." The hunter walked her home as the sun was setting, and when her mother saw her, safe and sound, she wept with relief and held her daughter tight. And Little Red Riding Hood did indeed learn her lesson. According to the Brothers Grimm, she lived a long and careful life, and never again did she stray from the path or trust a wolf in sheep's clothing. But you know, there's more to this story than just don't talk to strangers or stay on the path. Those are the obvious lessons, the ones meant for children. The real story, the deeper story, is about something else entirely. It's about innocence and experience, about the moment when childhood ends and you realize the world is more dangerous than you thought, about how predators don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look friendly, speak kindly, seem helpful. The wolf knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't attack Little Red Riding Hood on the path where woodcutters might hear. He didn't frighten her or threaten her. Instead, he was charming. He pointed out the flowers. He suggested so innocently that gathering them would be a kind thing to do. He manipulated her. That's the word we'd use today. He found her weakness, her desire to please, her innocent trust, and he used it against her. And Little Red Riding Hood, sweet and obedient in so many ways, broke the one rule that mattered. Not because she was bad, but because she didn't understand why the rule existed. Her mother had said, "Stay on the path." But had she explained what might happen if she didn't? Had she made the danger real? Children often don't understand warnings until it's too late. Don't touch the hot stove doesn't mean much until you've burned your hand. Don't talk to strangers is just words until a stranger proves dangerous. Little Red Riding Hood was lucky. She learned her lesson and survived. Not every child in every story is so fortunate. And the grandmother? She too was tricked by a voice that sounded trustworthy. "It's me, your granddaughter." And without verifying, without checking, she said, "Come in." Even the wise can be fooled. Even the experienced can be caught off guard. The wolf knew this. Predators always do. But there's something else in this story. Something I want you to think about as you drift off to sleep. The hunter saved them, yes. But in some versions of the story, versions older than the Brothers Grimm, versions from oral tradition, there is no hunter. In those versions, Little Red Riding Hood saves herself. She tricks the wolf, telling him she needs to go outside to relieve herself. He ties a rope to her leg to prevent her escape, but she unties it, ties it to a tree, and runs. Or she notices the wolf's teeth and runs before he can grab her. Or she fights back with whatever she can find. In these older versions, Little Red Riding Hood is not a passive victim waiting for a man to rescue her. She is clever, resourceful, brave. I like these versions. They remind us that even when we make mistakes, even when we trust the wrong person or stray from the safe path, we still have agency. We can still fight. We can still escape. The red hood itself has meaning, you know? Red, the color of blood, of passion, of life itself. Some scholars say the red hood represents the transition from childhood to womanhood. Others say it represents the girl's visibility, her inability to hide in the forest, her vulnerability. But I think it also represents something else. Courage. The courage to walk through the dark forest. The courage to visit a sick grandmother, even when it means facing danger. The courage to keep going after you've been swallowed by a wolf. Little Red Riding Hood wore her red hood with pride. She didn't hide. She walked openly through the world, trusting and kind and brave. And yes, she was nearly destroyed for it. But she learned, she survived, and she became wiser. That's the real lesson. Not be afraid of the world, not never trust anyone, but rather be careful, be aware, know that danger exists. But don't let fear stop you from walking through the forest. Just stay on the path. Remember the wisdom others have shared with you. And when a wolf offers you advice, remember, wolves are always hungry. Now, the Brothers Grimm, in their complete collection, actually included a second part to the Little Red Riding Hood story. It's lesser known, but it's worth telling. Sometime after the first encounter with the wolf, perhaps a few weeks, perhaps a few months, the grandmother called for Little Red Riding Hood to visit again. She had been baking, and she wanted to share some sausage rolls with her granddaughter. Little Red Riding Hood set out once more, wearing her red hood as always. But this time, she was different. This time, she had experience. As she walked along the path through the forest, another wolf appeared. This one was even larger than the first, with darker fur and colder eyes. "Good morning, little girl," the wolf said in his smoothest voice. "Where are you going on this fine day?" But Little Red Riding Hood didn't stop. She didn't answer. She kept walking, her eyes straight ahead. "I said, 'Good morning,'" the wolf tried again, walking alongside her. "Surely you're not rude enough to ignore me." "I'm going to my grandmother's house," Little Red Riding Hood said shortly. "And I'm staying on the path, and I'm not stopping for anything." The wolf tried a few more tactics, pointing out flowers, suggesting shortcuts, asking if she'd like him to walk with her for protection. But Little Red Riding Hood refused every suggestion, ignored every manipulation, and walked steadily onward. Frustrated, the wolf finally gave up on the indirect approach. "Fine," he snarled. Then I'll just go to your grandmother's house myself and wait for you there." And he ran off down the path. But Little Red Riding Hood was no longer the innocent child she had been. She knew exactly what the wolf intended, so she began to run too, taking a shortcut she had learned, running as fast as her legs could carry her. She reached her grandmother's cottage just moments after the wolf. She burst through the door, breathless, crying, "Grandmother, lock the door, there's a wolf coming." The grandmother, who had also learned from their previous encounter, jumped from her bed with surprising speed for an elderly woman. Together, she and Little Red Riding Hood barred the door, locked the windows, and prepared for a siege. The wolf arrived moments later and began his act. "Grandmother, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood. Let me in." But the grandmother called back, "You're not my granddaughter. My granddaughter is already here, safe inside. Go away, wolf." The wolf tried threats. He tried pleading. He tried reasoning. But the door stayed locked. Finally, in frustration, the wolf decided to climb onto the roof. There was a chimney, and he thought he might slip down it and surprise them from above. But the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood had anticipated this. They had built up the fire in the fireplace and set a large pot of water to boil. When they heard the wolf scrambling on the roof, they knew what he intended. Down the chimney came the wolf, expecting to drop into the room. Instead, he fell directly into the pot of boiling water. And that was the end of him. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother had saved themselves this time. No hunter needed. They had used their experience, their knowledge, and their teamwork to protect each other. "You see," the grandmother said, hugging her granddaughter close, "the lessons we learn from our mistakes, those are the lessons that keep us alive." And Little Red Riding Hood never again needed to be told twice about the dangers of the world. And so, we come to the end of our tale. Little Red Riding Hood, the girl in the red cloak, who learned through terror and survival that the world holds both beauty and danger, and that wisdom comes from experience. Think about this story as you drift off to sleep. Think about the paths we walk, the strangers we meet, the voices that sound friendly, but might have teeth hidden behind their smiles. Think about the innocence we all once had, and the experience that replaced it. The lessons we learned, sometimes gently, sometimes painfully. Think about the red hood itself, a symbol of visibility, of courage, of the refusal to hide even when the world is dangerous. And remember, wolves come in many forms. Some have fur and teeth. Others wear business suits or friendly smiles. The key is not to fear them so much that you never leave your house. The key is to recognize them, to stay on your path, to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. The forest is dark, yes, but it's also beautiful. The path is dangerous, yes, but it leads to grandmother's house, to love and care and connection. Walk it carefully. Walk it wisely. But walk it. And always, always remember, when someone in the forest tells you to leave the path, when a wolf suggests you stop to pick flowers, when a voice that sounds friendly encourages you to ignore the wisdom you've been given, remember Little Red Riding Hood. Remember the price of innocent trust. Remember that survival requires both courage and caution, both kindness and wisdom. The world needs people who wear red hoods and walk through dark forests, but it needs them to arrive at grandmother's house safely, with their baskets intact and their lessons learned. Sleep now, dear listener. Dream of red cloaks and forest paths, of flowers and wolves, of danger survived and wisdom earned. And if you hear a knock at your door in the night, if you hear a voice saying, "Let me in, I'm your friend," remember to ask, what big teeth you have. Good night. Thank you for walking through the dark forest with me tonight. If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever met a wolf disguised as a friend? What lesson did Little Red Riding Hood's story teach you? And remember that question from the beginning. If a stranger offered to walk with you through a dark forest, would you trust them or refuse? Let me know your answer now. Subscribe for more Brothers Grimm tales told as they were meant to be, with depth, darkness, and truth that helps us navigate our own dark forests. Tomorrow night, we tell another tale. Can you guess which one? Sweet dreams, and stay on the path.